just said, okay.
Don't
I'm just
just relax.
talking.
We edit things anyway, so don't
Oh,
even
so
worry.
you want to do it now? Or
Yeah,
something now?
yeah. Well, we're
All
doing
right.
something. We're just doing the interview now, but just like we're having a conversation.
Okay. All
So
right.
you were saying I'm a woman who woke up with a plan one day, and you were talking about your
Yes.
Facebook page.
Well, no, I think I actually mentioned that I woke up and didn't really have a plan.
Oh, you didn't have a plan. Okay,
It really wasn't a plan.
that's
And
okay.
I still don't really have a really firm plan. It's more, I think of someone I'm very much motivated by my sort of inner sort of intuition, but that's fed by, years of experience, I think I just felt myself I feel very uniquely situated at a certain confluence of events. And I just really felt compelled to say something and keep doing. I think the one thing, if I tell you I have a focus that I'm committed to, is we've got to keep talking. We've
Hmm.
got to keep talking. That I'd say is my main mission. And so it sort of drives everything else. I think one of the things that really just sort of blew me over was this rhetoric that I heard, which was, gosh, I just didn't know. I just didn't know. And I thought, first of all, I've heard that before. I heard that 20 years ago. I happen to have been involved, more caught up in the middle of the Rodney King protests. I literally was I was at a meeting. This is when I was actually practicing law. I was at a meeting all day. I don't know what happened, but we must have not have had. It was a very intense series of negotiations. So we really didn't hear lots about what was going on. And this is when I lived in Los Angeles.
And I'm
So
from
I
there
was in
too.
San
Yeah.
Francisco,
Hmm.
quickly jumped on a plane. It was a big rush to make the next flight, back to Los Angeles. And there was that immediate feeling that something was very wrong because it was mid-afternoon and I'm driving from downtown Los Angeles to where I lived, which was sort of like central Los Angeles. I can't exactly remember where I lived, but and there were just no cars, and that just doesn't happen in Los Angeles. And it was sort of like something out of a horrible apocalyptic movie where there was like, bits of papers fluttering. And then I looked off at the distance and I could see burning. And I thought, what is this? Turned the radio on. And I think this was 20 years ago. It would have been about just before people really were using like cell phones. I don't think I had the cell phone. I had to wait until I sort of got home to really find out what was going on. When I got to the freeway, and my instinct to get onto the freeway then, I didn't like the streets. I'm like, well, nobody's on the streets, so I'm not going to be where nobody else is at. And then it was bumper to bumper, and you could sort of feel even, uh, on the freeway, this sort of, it's like you could feel this energy of people. You could look and people looked dazed. It just didn't look right. Um, so I eventually got home and, but anyway, more sort of it was as, but I remember when I got off the freeway near where I was living, I drove right into the middle of the protest. I mean, people I had to drive on the sidewalk. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is not something you're used to seeing in Los Angeles every day. But the thing was, is that in the few days afterwards, I was, I hadn't been in Los Angeles that long at that time. And I was just really struck by the fact that people kept coming up to me. I mean, you can hear how I talk, right? I'm not from here. They kept coming up to me and saying, what's going on? You're asking me what's going on? They lived here. And I thought, how do they not know what's going on? And so I made it my business to know what was going on. I put myself in the middle of Compton. A couple of things really struck me that I saw on the news. One was an elderly gentleman who was African American. He was saying, "I just wish I could get an education. I wish I could, but I'm sort of stuck." And I also learned on the news that they didn't have access to loans the way they did in other neighborhoods. So what I'm getting at is I'm just one person who's listening to things and like connecting dots. It wasn't some big, like I didn't know about any of this, but I'm listening and I'm looking. And I was also struck at the way in which people were being characterized by newscasters who were supposed to be objective. They were using horrible, demeaning words. It was just, all of it was just, what is going on? What is this? And it's funny, the way I talk about it being 2020 today, it was the way I was talking then. It's what was it, 1998 maybe? It's 1998. I can't believe people are talking like this. Well, that was many decades after the civil rights movement. I realize I'm having this sort of deja vu. Every now and again, there's some big something. I mean, we seem to, like, what progress are we making? It just sort of feels like we're stuck. So when I talk about that conference event, is that part of it was having the memory of that. And by the way, I went on to do some work with the local community then in Compton, and we put together a regional job training centre, and I thought that it was getting people to talk and come up with a solution and getting into action. So I'm very much about that. But what was happening today, I mean, this year, it was breaking my heart, to be honest. And I was hearing the same phrases again. What's going on? We didn't know. And I'm like, I thought you would have known at least 20 years ago. You should have known from the civil rights movement. What is going on that the message doesn't seem to be sinking in? How are people just not knowing? And then I sort of remembered, one of my mentors in law school was Derek Bell. He's one of the founders of critical race theory. Mm. And so I saw people on social media, they were using bits and pieces of what he was about. And I thought, oh my gosh, people don't really know that where some of these things are coming from. And so that's why I said, I sort of felt like I was in the middle of, look, I realized, gosh, I've got knowledge. I've been doing this work and people don't seem to understand. And I heard a lot of what Derek Bell, I heard things direct from Derek Bell. And also people were mischaracterizing critical race theory. That felt really bad, because I really liked Derek Bell, who's more than a professor to me. He was a lovely, lovely man that I got to know personally. Mm-hmm. And I think I just sort of felt this sense of, we seem to be missing key figures. It seemed like we don't have the Martin Luther King, and not that I think necessarily we need a leader. I really do like the idea that maybe this is the time where everybody sort of takes some ownership now. We're not looking for one or two people to sort of speak up. Let's all take ownership now. That was back then. Gosh, at least certainly have we not arrived at the point in time where now everybody, at least people of color, should know enough now that they can take some ownership and not be waiting for someone else to do something. Maybe that's unfair to sort of characterize it that way, but I do feel there's something very different about what's happening now, what happened in the 50s and 60s. And I did feel certain, I don't really know if I have the right words for it. Is it a personal responsibility? I just felt a calling that I needed to speak up. If people don't know, I want to say something. But I also felt that since I've been in this country, I feel it's different here. Discussions of racism are very different here. And I've always felt that. And I've sort of struggled to put my finger on it. And I think I'm still sort of developing my ideas about how it's different and why it's different. I think some of it's the geography and the specific history to here. I think the history of slavery, it just evolved differently in the Caribbean, in America, and in England. And when I talk about a confluence of events, I feel like I'm in the middle of something. I've lived in all three. I've lived in the Caribbean. I've lived in England. I grew up there. And I've lived here for a long period of time. So I feel like, gosh, I've really got some insight here. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to be of service, to be honest. I'd like to be a part of, let's put this to rest once for all. Let's figure out what's the root cause of what's going on. Why are some people not hearing and understanding? Why are some people still suffering? We had a civil rights movement. What went wrong? And also, of course, I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a psychotherapist, and I specialize in racial trauma. So I thought, well, gosh, if I don't speak up, right?
Right.
So anyway, I've just been, there was no particular plan or order to it, but it was wherever I felt that I could reach people, that's what I wanted to do. And that's why, of course,
And the Facebook, is that when you started the Facebook page?
Yes, or? I started some of it was because of what's happened, right? COVID, people are online. and they're sort of just sitting there waiting. So for me, it was a natural thing to do. You know, what was I going to do? Where was I going to go? You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're there, they're waiting. I thought, well, gosh, you know, I can talk. Glad this is not being filmed. But I just thought, I just, I would talk to whoever would listen. You know, I would break down what I knew. You know, I, as a lawyer, I have a perspective of, I learned constitutional law from Derek Bell, right? So, about just part of, you know, conflict race theory, it looks at the way in which the law has its impact on race relations, and just basically what happened in the 50s and 60s, where maybe the civil rights movement sort of fell short. You know, critical race theory came about to basically address the limitations of the civil rights movement. It's not counter to it. It's more just the next sort of step kind of thing. That, in a nutshell, the civil rights movement was really focused on, understandably, was focused on preventing racial discrimination. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? And you know, they used the activists and the advocates for social justice focused on the law as a means of correcting that. Okay, and so what happened was the focus ended up being on you know, not explicitly using race to discriminate. Okay, I think I can't really say it wasn't thought out, but I'm saying one of the things that happened though is that I don't think it got at the underlying root causes of racism, so it didn't stop it from happening. I think there's sort of an idea that, gosh, if we legislate this, then, you know, people get along and they can't do it anymore, and we won't have racism. I think that was sort of the thinking, and I think that's why people are caught off guard, because they think, well, we had laws. Look, it was really awful before. We had laws. We've got big laws, and surely there's no racism. But they didn't realise that the laws took, like, you know, Brown v. Board of Education, they took care of explicit racism. And so what happened is that people were still discriminating, but not explicitly on the basis of race, right?
Well, racism really didn't end. It's
No.
just that people were being controlled and following rules all of a sudden. So nowadays, you still have that racism that's inside of people. So, like with your Facebook page, is that a good place for people to kind of peel back the layers, so to speak, of and really examine their own racism as well as what's going on in society?
Yes, but I started. So actually, it's sort of evolved. Initially, I believe that, you know, sort of you start close to home within your sphere of influence. Because I'm a psychotherapist, my initial thing was to target therapists and the mental health field, because I feel that's such a place where there's where you know, you interact with BIPOC individuals, and what better place when you have the awareness of, let's say, racial trauma and discrimination, to really have a great impact on the lives of BIPOC individuals, okay, marginalized groups. We could do a lot right there. And I also thought that therapists, most therapists that I come across, you know, have good intentions to help people. So I thought, what a willing, receptive audience to really hear, hey, you know, this has been overlooked, and here's how we could do things or whatever. So I started with that. But then there were just a lot of other people that were interested as well. And I thought, well, you know, I don't know if I want to limit it to just therapists then. So I thought I sort of, you know, I changed the name of the group to really deal with people that wanted to do something but didn't know how. A lot of people were still, when I started the group, in a sort of stunned kind of posting black squares kind of thing and lending support. But really, I just have a lot of people approaching me saying, they don't actually know what to do. And I think, and I guess that for me triggered this sort of, I've always seemed to somehow sort of be in the middle. I don't know, it's because I'm mixed race, but, or just sort of also considered a bit of the other. I seem to understand the different perspectives, and frankly, a lot of people who are non-BIPOC did feel comfortable approaching me and saying, I don't know what to do. I want to sort of not bother Black people, right? And I don't want to burden them. But then it doesn't look like I'm doing anything. And then do I do this? Do I do that? They sort of felt, and I thought, well, I didn't mind talking to them. Now make it sound like they're a project or something, but I just felt like, look, I seem to, I don't know, I just seem to be able to connect. And I thought I didn't mind, and I've done it before, just helping guide people to get from being frankly performative into action. And part of it was to draw on my own lived experience. I know what it's like to sort of be sort of out of it and like, gosh, what do you do? And I just took a very methodical approach. I didn't have success doing what I was doing because of my color. I think it's something anybody can do, but I really believe that, there are many things that people can do within their sphere of influence, but there is this discomfort some people have. And I felt, I thought it was a good spot to be in, to be somebody of color and talking to people that were white and doing it in a way where we could actually connect. Because this is what I come back to. It's very important. First of all, we need allies. Just need allies. We cannot do this on our own. But not only that, but a lot of well-intentioned, good people that want to do something, they don't know what to do. And I hear that and I relate to that, and that's okay. If they're asking, then I'm happy to answer them and help them. And I really do feel like we'll go on that journey together. I think we can do that in a way that's not shameful, that's not bullying. For whatever reason, actually, I'm not going to say for whatever reason people don't know. I do think that a lot of people are not exposed to the curriculum that I've had. I do have the benefit of having been in at least 3 different countries now where the same period of history is told over very differently. And when you, from a young age, realize that there's no such thing as the history, that, oh gosh, history, I mean, we get it from a very particular point of view. I can get why some people here don't know about other things. You're just not taught, it's not there in the culture. And this isn't about blame or making people feel guilty and horrible and just sitting down in despair. Look, my whole approach as a therapist isn't about that. As a therapist, that it's about, when somebody sits in that chair opposite you, it's empathizing, trying to see things from their perspective and trying to move towards a path of healing. I take the same approach in my anti-racist work. I'm not going to get anywhere beating up on someone. But first of all, people that I'm talking to, they were not around then. And at least I'm not talking to anybody who intentionally did anything. I'm looking at people that generally want to improve things. I'm starting there. We've been talking about me, but I love the tone. I think you get it. You have that tone in the group, and I've been trying to really get that tone where we're not falling into despair. We're being honest about what's happening, but we're not doing this sort of shock thing. And here's another bad thing that happened, and here's another bad thing that happened. It's taken a while for me to get those posts in the way that, look, I don't want to be dictatorial. I want people to feel their way. I want people to be able to make mistakes, right? You're going to flop sometimes. I don't say the right thing all the time. Sorry, my computer's not working. Interspoken, and so
that's perfect.
It's all right.
Yeah, your head's a little. I'm seeing.
Yeah, I just like.
There you go.
I just.
There you go.
Anyway,
that's all right. That's
fine. Everything's falling apart.
Don't worry about it. But I've noticed that on the Facebook page that, like I said, there's been some Facebook pages where I've seen just a lot of anger and people kind of almost, like in typing, yelling at each other, and it doesn't have a sense of people trying to help each other, support each other, allow for room for mistakes, allow for questions that might be, oh boy, I can't believe that person asked that question. And then it has a sense of trying to heal and learn at the same time.
Yes.
And like you said, especially with COVID, give people the opportunity. If they're sitting in front of your computers, you might as well be doing something productive, because you can't go to meetings, you can't go to cultural festivals, and you can't go to seminars. So let me ask you this, though. Some people would say, well, what is this racialized trauma? I mean, is there kind of a short, I know there's a very detailed explanation, but is there kind of a a short answer to that? And for somebody who says, well, you know, I just thought there was no more racism. We had a black president. Well, but I hear people are traumatized racially. You know, what does that mean?
Well, it isn't something that just happened this year, you know? Um, it's really, look, there are many different terms for it. I'm someone, sometimes I'm not that hung up on a term, but I do recognize that, you know, when we label something, it's part of the process of validation, right? We can kind of legitimize something that's happening. So I'm not stuck on the labels that we use. And sometimes, you know, this phenomenon is also referred to as, you know, slave syndrome and whatever. Gosh, even PTSD at one point was called what people refer to as being shell shocked, right? So these things take an evolution. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not hung up on the term, and people are scoffing at everything. But what do you think? I mean, when you're treating, you know, symptoms, you know, a lot of things look like a lot of things. You know, it takes a while to sort of formulate, oh, these things kind of go together, and it's probably this. So what I'd refer to as what we're discussing in terms of racial trauma, first of all, I would say, you know, it's not a category that's in the DSM, which is, I wouldn't say it's problematic, but one of the things that I do to sort of help people understand, and actually I do have workshops on these things where I talk to therapists, is get your head around, for example, a good starting point is maybe developmental trauma. That's also not something that's in the DSM, but if you talk to a lot of therapists that deal especially with trauma, it's terribly commonly used, but it's not in the DSM and we're treating it, right? So and what is developmental trauma? Well, that refers to not a discrete maybe event. You know, in the DSM-5, one of the criteria for PTSD, then, example, is that there's an actual specific event. And that's always been like sort of the sticky point for, you know, what we call sometimes trauma with a little t, just a succession of just, you know, stressful things that people are exposed to over time. You know, it results in symptoms that very much similar to PTSD. So in the case of racial trauma, we're seeing hypervigilance, you know, a response to the startle effect. Well, the startle effect, you know, rage, anger, you know, but you can also have symptoms of withdrawal. You know, all the classic symptoms that we associate with you know, post-traumatic stress syndrome. But with the added thing of they have their origins in racism, okay? And for a lot of people, this isn't something that just happened with one generation, it's successive generations. And when you group that together with findings that we have from epigenetics, you know, this idea that there are certain things that maybe that influence us, you know, from generation to generation. Racial trauma definitely looks like a thing, you know, even if it doesn't have this nice sort of neat category in the DSM. So in terms of what I'm treating something that looks like PTSD, that definitely has its origins and is impacted by racism, you know, and it doesn't tend to sort of affect people in isolation. You know, perhaps their whole family or their community is affected by this. One of the things I do in my training is help people understand criteria that would fit that criterion A in the DSM for an event. So it might be witnessing, for example, police violence. I think, and many of us think, that with COVID happening, that was a stressor, right? And then when we added on top of that, what happened with the George Floyd, and seeing those videos over and over again, I think that was a trigger for many African Americans, okay? And many of us saw a huge rise in our referrals from the African American community. And I'm telling you, these people have trauma and very much affected by what's happening racially. In fact, they all mentioned that. So I feel like it's definitely a thing. But I would add to what I've just said, there are some symptoms though. And one of the things I do, I primarily train white clinicians you know, who are not, maybe not, who have some awkwardness about dealing with BIPOC individuals, especially if they feel that the issue of racism is going to come up, especially now. So some of the things I sort of help them with is how to, like, what other symptoms they might look out for that they're not familiar with. For example, I would actually sort of add this as an additional symptom, is distrust of white people. And I say that because it's right at the heart of what we're talking about. And initially people are just, gosh, did you just say that? And people want to bring up all sorts of history and feelings about that. But think about it. It makes a lot of sense, you know, that people might be very, very wary. And sitting in front of a white clinician, that trigger, right? You know, something that I'm suggesting that, you know, for them to be mindful of, that they might not have thought about. And at least a lot of the clinicians that I talk to never even thought about that, and didn't think about dealing with people of color, that might be a factor, that they were wary or distrustful, and might even have a tendency to isolate themselves from white people. One of the things I emphasize about the experience of BIPOC individuals in this country is this quest to find safe spaces. You know, for some people, it just doesn't feel like anywhere is very safe. Not where they live, not where they work. Going out to get a pint of milk could be a life or death situation. We can say these things, but I don't know if some people really understand what that must feel like. And so part of what I do is to really have people sit down and think about what that might feel like and why people might be reacting to you a certain way. And it's not personal. When you're traumatized, sometimes you're all over the place and you're looking for safety. The number one thing I think in trauma treatment is to try to establish safety for your client, you know? And I think understanding the Black experience, that's so key to establishing that safety. And I feel like I have to remind a lot of clinicians of the skills they already have, but just to adapt it here. And that's part of my message, you see, is that, look, a lot of the things when you're dealing with racism, we're not starting from a blank slate. You already know many of these things. But I think there's been such tension around discussing racism, people just get discombobulated. And frankly, this is not a popular view, but I think this experience is also traumatizing for white people. I think it's messed with their sense of self and who they are. You can't have Black without now suddenly having a white. And many people woke up and found themselves with a definition that's horrifying to them. I try to hold space for that need. And that's part of what I think, why you feel there's a difference in that group. I'm not pandering. And yes, I get flack for that. But part of my position is my education and training as a trauma therapist. So if I'm sitting in the middle of trauma, I'm sitting in the middle of trauma, you know? And I'm about healing, whether you're sitting in front of me and you're white or you're sitting in front of me and you're Black. And I think that's what we need right now. And that's where my emphasis is. It's not this punitive have at you thing. And frankly, that's why some of the things I was reading about critical race theory, about anti-racist work, I feel they were so, at best I can say, they were so misguided and ill-informed. I felt like I had to speak up. I don't know what other people are doing. This is what I'm doing. It's about healing. What I'm doing is very American, is very much about unity. We weren't talking about it now, but one of the things that's also profoundly affected me is I was in Manhattan September 11th. I tell you, it's something I still get emotional about. I felt such a love for this country with what I saw. It was I felt like I saw the worst of humanity, but I also saw the best. I saw Black with white. I saw people were Americans on that day, and I saw people helping each other. And I will always hold that in my heart about what America's about. You know, the things that are here, they were always here. We've just buried them. But I feel there's a lot of hope. And I don't think we need to throw America out the, throw it out just yet, you know. I think there's a lot to save, and I think there's a lot to be hopeful for. And so one of the things I really want to do is to get people energized around that. Don't despair, don't get overwhelmed. I know, yes, I feel that, I hear that. I don't want to be sort of this sort of bully, feel that, I hold that, but come on, let's go. Come on, what can you do? What can you do today? That's the kind of tone that I want to adapt. And I don't think I'm being naive. I'm not being naive. Because you know what? I've been there before. I haven't changed. I've been there before, and I've done things and I've seen things happen. One of the things I'm most proud of was that regional job training centre. I got an award from the city of Compton. It was for leadership and public service. And I love saying that, and I'm so proud. You know why? Because I was scared at one point. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I feel that I think it makes what I've been through relatable. I can relate to what people are going through. And my style is, come on, let's see what we can do. Not, I don't want to shove people and cajole them. I want to walk with them. And yes, it's sometimes it's a bit slow, but
Well, I think that we're at kind of a crossroads, and I think, as a nation as well as individuals, you can go in one of two directions. You can go down that kind of destructive, angry, rageful, punitive, as you said. That's a great word. You can use that approach, but I think what that does is that tears people apart, and then it just, it's self-destructive, really. Whereas if you're bringing people together with the idea of healing the wounds, the first thing you got to do is bring people together, and people, you need to keep them there. And I think if people get defensive, angry, feel like they're being punished, feel like they're being attacked, they're going to leave. And then we will never build those bridges, that will unify the country. And I think you're right. In 9/11, I thought that too, because I said, at that point, there was no black or white. It wasn't Republican, Democrat. It was like, we are all in the same boat here. We are all one country. And I've seen other, examples of that. But I think what happens sometimes, people get fearful. They're fearful of other people. It might be different from them, or sometimes we're manipulated. We can be manipulated by politicians, by the media, and they prey on those fears. And all of a sudden, now you're my enemy, because somehow, because of you, I have less now, or you pose some kind of a threat, which is all up in here. But like you said, people, I found it really interesting. You talk about the trauma isn't one single incident. It's an ongoing kind of accumulative, I think, kind of effect that brings people to that, as you said, anxiety and depression and anger, etc.
Yeah, and imagine, part of it also, there are still a lot of messages out there, implicit, explicit, that are demeaning, very demeaning to people of color. And, we see people all the time who are non-BIPOC, who are stressed and they have low self-esteem. And it's funny because in this country we talk about that a lot. But I think the thing that maybe sometimes racial trauma comes closest to also is the experience of people that have been bullied, and the experience of people who are perhaps, domestic violence survivors. Just the unrelenting fear and the messages, and feeling that you have no place to escape. It's, because there's those things aren't in the DSM either, right? But they're real. And if you've been treating people, you can see, that these experiences have just worn them down. They doubt themselves. And I think in terms of looking at racial trauma intergenerationally, so some very common survival mechanisms are to sort of, buck up, suppress this, compartmentalize that, project strength, right? These are all things that we do to protect ourselves, right? And so, look, in some ways I've described African-American individuals, but it doesn't mean that they don't hurt inside. And all of that has come at what cost? We know that the unrelenting stress, one of the things it does, I mean, it cripples you, it affects your health. And people of color don't just have high blood pressure and obesity problems because they just like to eat.
Mhm.
It's stress, people, stress. Right? So sometimes it's just sitting there. It's sort of like, go for the obvious. Don't do this sort of end run. And the other thing that I like to emphasize is that we do this terrible thing. People are victimized, and then you victimize them again by blaming them for the position they're in. Now, sometimes when I look at it and it gets overwhelming, it's a wonder some people even make it out of bed. It's a wonder some people even make it out of bed. So I minimally, if you consider yourself an activist, and one of the things that I sort of say is that you don't always have to be on the front line with the protest banner in your hand. No, you can be an activist in many, many different ways. But minimum, talk about this, validate these experiences. Don't pretend they're not happening. We can do so much just doing that. And to just even sort of, there's a lot we can do in the workplace. Just noticing, the inclusivity, what messages are being sent. I mean, for goodness sake, wasn't it just last week, the CEO of Wells Fargo, like seriously?
Yeah.
Seriously? And so people, this is what I'm talking about. People, can you imagine how many times do people of color hear that?
Mm-hmm.
At least he said it. People also say it in their communication. They say it when you look up and there's nobody like you there, right? And you just seem to be on a different career track. And I'm sorry. Look, sometimes I'm just going to flat out say, if you really think Black people don't have any talent, well, if you're thinking that, then we can probably just use the R word, because it's just ridiculous. That's just utterly ridiculous, because I don't know where you live and where you have to be hiding that's what you really think. So
Well,
yeah.
a lot of people live in a bubble. They live in their own bubble, and they kind of think this is the real world, and they base assumptions on no experience, ignorance, no proximity. They might have the one Black friend they have, or they know one Hispanic person, but then yet they make definitive statements about groups, how they should protest. No, they shouldn't kneel because it's anti-American. What would you, if you're living in a farm in South Dakota somewhere, what would you know about a person's life in Chicago, except what you see on the news? You know nothing. So to come to any kind of a definitive conclusion about how they should act and what they should be feeling and how they should just work hard and you'll be successful like Barack Obama, that's all you need to do. It's just, it's dangerous, because then it facilitates more racism, because then you spread that into your office culture, you spread it to your family, and then they become clones of you. And it's a never ending cycle, I think.
But it also betrays the reality of history, because when people say things like that, I just feel like they don't know their history very well. I mean, do they know anything about the Red Summer, 1919, 1920?
Mm-hmm.
People did pull themselves up by the bootstraps. They did acquire wealth. They did. And what happened?
Got all burned down.
Yeah, that didn't work out well, did it?
Yeah.
And then we don't have to go back so far. Let's start with 1930. 34, 38, the Wagner Act, also, the housing policies and redlining. Well, let's look at that. That's the government. That's government loans. And then even when they got rid of that, you had like predatory lending. Like, I mean, these are real things. I didn't make it up. They're in the history books.
Prison pipeline.
When you just look at it, you're like, look, something's going on here. I mean, you're going to keep saying it's all just like random, coincidental things. There definitely seems to be some sort of message that we don't want exclusion. So that's one of the things I do also in my workshops, just educating people about these things, and sort of because some people, but I don't know, it's another thing, because when I explain these things, they sort of had heard of them before. They just sort of hadn't. I don't know what happens. I don't bring up anything when people say, like, I've never heard that before. Like, I mean, some things, but like not everything I say. but it's very interesting. I think it's like a combination of things like groupthink and denial and what we all do to protect ourselves, and then just sort of getting on with the day. I think it's a combination of different things. It does show how, this is what's unsettling, it does show to some degree how malleable we can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
How, maybe some of us looked at what happened in Europe during World War II or World War I even and thought, oh, how did that even happen there? These people are crazy. How can they just did this and they just did that? And then, but there's a way that human beings behave sometimes, and with a certain set of conditions, feelings of scarcity and whatever, that they I think this is part of what's going on. People don't like to feel had. I mean, in workshops at the end, I was a bit taken aback. In my early run of workshops, people said that they were very angry.
Mm-hmm.
And initially I thought, oh my God, because they were kind of quiet. I thought, oh my gosh, I think I've traumatized my audience, and I'd I'd stop and I'd say, every now and again, and say, is everyone okay? Shall I go on? Everyone's like, yes, more. And they weren't really asking many questions. Sometimes I wondered if they were listening, but they were very intently. But I was surprised at how many people were actually kind of angry and stuck around after my workshop. And then they said things like, we feel betrayed, manipulated. I think that's part of what's happening to people. You wake up and have a sense of who you are, right? And how the world is. I'm very much interested in identity, having lived in different countries and being mixed. So my eye goes to like identity issues. I think I'm very sympathetic and have a lot of empathy for people just feeling discombobulated and not understanding, like, wait, hold on, like, have I been asleep? Like, what am I racist? What am I? And I don't know, somehow that sort of resonates with me. And I feel that there is a part of me that sort of was to help sort of detangle all of that, and say, okay, look, these are the people that they care. That why am I doing this? I think I really, truly, honestly believe they care. And by the way, I do want to say, because I'd be remiss if I don't, some of my, not my only support, but some of my biggest support has been from white allies. And I'm so appreciative, because it's not been easy. We're still going through we're still going through COVID, we're trying to do all this while we're juggling many different things. And there are people that know they're not protesting, they're not out there. And some of them can't even go to my workshops. They don't have the time or something like that. But you know what? They're on Facebook. They're sending me messages. They will sometimes Zoom with me, and they'll be like leading me on. And I find that very supportive. And so I'm not going to say that there are people of all colors here that don't care. I'm not going to say that. That's just not true.
Right.
And I feel that, and some of them they do that. But they'll also tell me, I don't know what to do next. Should I do this? Would that look performative? What do you want me to do? Just laugh them?
Well,
Laugh them off?
I've seen some of those
Yeah.
conversations too, because I
Oh.
usually check out the Facebook page every couple of days, and I post
Oh.
things. Yeah, so I mean, I
Yeah.
see some of that where somebody said, what should I do? And I think there was one post where a woman was saying, well, maybe I should just like disconnect myself from people of
Oh,
color
yeah.
altogether or something. But everybody
Yeah.
kind of converged on that person and gave her some
Yeah.
good advice. And I think
Yeah.
she really felt good about it. It was very productive and positive, I think.
Yeah. And I made a strategic decision to not just have a group about allyship be just white people, but
Mm-hmm.
people too. We're going to work in partnership. Not that I'm not crazy about the word, by the way, but I'm not getting hung up on
Well, don't get hung
labels
up
or
on
anything.
terms.
Yeah, and there are some people that I let in of color, and they come in to teach white people a lesson, and they get very frustrated that things aren't moving quickly. And I've tried to be diplomatic there. Look, it's not so easy, because look, I'm also going to just be very frank. This work is not easy peasy either. There are people that I've sort of tried to help as allies, and look, I can't really pretty this up. They'll take a tone with me,
Mm.
and it sort of triggers me, to be honest, and this indignant, arrogant thing, especially initially when I was doing this, oh, it didn't sit well with me at all. And I didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
And so the only way I know how to sort of handle that is I'm just very frank. And I'm like, listen, I will put my pen down then. And I'm like, listen, I will help, but there's some, I'm not going to sit here and not be respected, but I'm not, there's some things I'm not putting up with. So maybe I'll have to say, let's have some space here, but I will not do this. That's why I'm not pandering.
Right.
My approach as a therapist is rather direct. You know, I'm not here to be, you're not going to beat up on me. That's not what this is about. No, we're not going there. Right? I'm just, okay, so you didn't know. We'll just sort of move on from there. But I'm not going to have somebody, you know what I'm saying? Because some people like
No,
that.
there's no reason
They get
for
very
that.
defensive. And honestly, I feel like I've been, they're like, wow, I can't believe you're saying that. And all this kind of, I'm like, oh, calm down. Calm down.
Well,
You know? But I'm like that in my therapy, to be honest. People come to me for my help. I'm tolerant and understanding that people are upset, you know? They're going to raise their voices sometimes. You know, there's a range. You can't be expecting people to be, you know, all polite and drinking tea and whatever, they're suffering from trauma. But I do have a sort of a ground rule. I'm going to be respected. You're not going to take stuff out on me. I can't work with someone if you're sort of targeting me and you're doing all that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's a matter of like, you know, transference, counter-transference, working with that. You know, we are trained to sort of deal with that. So sometimes it's a bit of a grey area, but look, one of the things I sort of acknowledge to myself, especially early on, I think I've gotten a bit better, but when we were in the smack in the middle of the COVID and then, you know, just after the George Floyd thing, I'm recognizing, as many therapists are, we're also part of what's going on. And if we think we're going to come at things now with all the mindset and the capability that we had before all of this, I mean, I think that's a bit unrealistic. We're still, it's a bit rare. We're going through what some of our clients are going through, right?
yeah.
But what am I going to do? I'm not going to not help. So sometimes I have to just realize that I don't have the bandwidth I used to have, right? Know when to pull back. And so that's what I was saying initially when I was doing this work, I had to kind of feel that out a bit. You know, I was getting triggered more than I might normally, and had to kind of process that, you know? You don't realize sometimes that what's happening is really sort of affecting you sort of personally, you know? But, you know, it's part of our reality, 2020.
Well, this has been great. I know you have to go get your milk, and I've
Yes.
got to go send off some emails. But well, let me just stop recording here for a second.